fight? How many of you went home and just had a really good fight? Put your hands down. You're not supposed to do that. Okay. This morning, we're going to talk about parent-child relationships. And I think some of you may be sitting there thinking, well, my kids are grown and gone, and I can check out for these next 35 minutes or so, but I'm hoping you don't do that. And here's the reason why. God has placed children in a family, and sometimes that family is obviously a biological family, but sometimes the family is a broader sense of the family. And my guess is that everybody in this room has some level of connection to a child, a teenager, a young adult. And how many of you discovered, even when your kids were growing up, that there were seasons in which you didn't have nearly the kind of influence as a coach had with your child, or a neighbor, or a teacher? And so our thought is that if we are going to be vital followers of Jesus Christ, and by the way, every single service, every single message, the bottom line is always Jesus, right? And today is about how to worship Jesus, how to be more like Jesus, but to do so in our relationships, particularly in the parent-child relationship, or the coach-child relationship, or the teacher-child relationship. Whatever you find yourself in, think about the kids in your life. If you do have kids in the home, whether they're children, teens, even if your young adults are still in your home, hopefully you are parenting different during their different stages of development, because you're a growing follower of Jesus, and you know you can't treat your 23-year-old who still lives at home the same way you did when they were 14. That don't work. You know what I'm saying? So today is about something very, very practical. Now, when Holly and I, when our kids were home, oftentimes we would find ourselves saying something like this: man, we wish we had a resident psychologist. We wish we had a resident Christian therapist that would just kind of like answer questions, because your kids don't come with a little manual, okay? And so today we have the opportunity to talk to a very special person. His name is Ted Bradford. He's going to share more about himself in just a moment. But Ted and his wife Lisa and their kids have been coming to church at Emmanuel, longtime church members, over a decade. And Ted's job, just give you a little snippet, is he's a professional Christian therapist who has spent his entire lifetime working with parents and children. So would you like to welcome Ted with us today? Okay? So what we've done is Ted and I sat down over the course of 2 or 3 times of getting together, and we said, okay, let's come up with some questions that we think every parent and every child needs to connect with. But the first question is simply this: Ted, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your family. Who are you?
Thank you, Mark. It's definitely a privilege to be here today, especially on Graduate Sunday. Congratulations to all the graduates and their parents and their families. We've been attending Emmanuel for about 15 years. As I recall, the Sunday morning that we became members here at Emmanuel was the same Sunday morning that Pastor Larry Cook announced that he was leaving. Coincidence? I'm not sure. But it's interesting from a personal standpoint. Lisa and I had 2 kids pretty early in the marriage, Olivia and Trent, and to be honest, they were great, happy kids. And at that point in time, I think Lisa and I thought, parenting is easy. Isn't that hard? A few years later, we were blessed with twin boys and went from feeling like we were happy parents to not sleeping for 6 months. So it was definitely a challenge. The kids are all grown up now. Olivia's married. Trent moved out of the house a month or so ago, so that's sad, but good for him. The twins are actually graduating this year. They graduated from Faith Christian Academy. They have a table in the back, so feel free to stop back and say hello to them. Real quick about me, I grew up in this area. My dad was actually one of the founding members of Calvary Church of Souderton. And we were at church every time the church doors opened at Calvary. And back then, in the 70s and 80s, I mean, there was Sunday morning service, Sunday evening service, boys brigade, Monday night, Wednesday night service, youth group activities over the weekend. So I was at church a lot, and a lot of great memories for me growing up in the church like that. Mark asked me to share when I accepted Christ in my life. I remember a time, I was young, but I remember at Vacation Bible School where I accepted the Lord in my life. I also remember probably about 10 times after that, growing up in church, I accepted the Lord in my life. But I went to college out in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Fort Wayne Bible College is where I met Lisa. Lisa's from Indiana. Graduated from there in 1989. Came back here to Pennsylvania. Started at Biblical Theological Seminary. Got my master's in counseling. At that point in time, I had my first counseling job, which was at a juvenile residential program called New Life Youth and Family Services in Harleysville. Some of you may have heard of New Life. I was there for over 20 years. Got my degree from Biblical in '93, and at that point in time, started working at Calvary Church as a counselor. Still at Calvary Church, working as a counselor there. It's called Bucksmont Counseling at Calvary. About that same time, I started at Penn Foundation in Sellersville, which some of you may have heard of as well, when I was at the staff of Penn Foundation for about 20 years. So I've been blessed to have been able to work with kids and families in different settings. Through New Life, it was through the court setting. I still work in the court setting full-time, not in the residential setting. But with the outpatient situations, it's more the day-to-day struggles that families have. So again, I've been blessed to be able to work in a couple different settings.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So as Christians, our default is always go to Scripture, right? And so Ted and I looked at 4 scriptures in particular, and they really have to do with, from a parent's perspective, the first 3, and then the last scripture we want to look at has to do from a child's perspective. So, Ted, I'm going to throw out Psalm 127, verse 3 says, "Children are a gift from the Lord." What does that mean from your perspective as a counselor when you're like counseling parents that may not exactly feel that way at this moment? Just kind of unpack that a little bit.
That's very true, Mark. When parents bring their kids in for counseling and they're struggling, typically they don't refer to their kids as gifts, more so they're handfuls. To me, this verse serves as a wonderful reminder to us that kids are a gift from the Lord, that they are a blessing from the Lord. We as parents know, especially when kids are young, they can be a lot of work. It can be difficult at times. We're tired a lot. And I really believe this verse serves as that reminder that kids are a gift from the Lord. Even times that they're a handful, even times that we're tired as parents, that reminder could be helpful for us. I'm at a stage personally with all 4 of my kids graduated that you can't help but look back and feel like this went so fast. And as much as it was stressful having twin boys at times, I missed the kids being young. So for me especially, this verse hits home of the Lord telling us the kids are a blessing and to treat them as a blessing.
Okay. What about Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4? Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger by the way that you treat them. Rather, bring them up with the discipline and the instruction that comes from the Lord. I have 3 questions. The first is, why do you think fathers, in particular, are called out by the Apostle Paul?
That's an interesting question, Mark. First thing I'll say is, in fairness to dads, and with Father's Day coming up, I'll be fair to dads. Uh, Moms can provoke children to anger as well. Now, this verse is referring to dads, to fathers. But my take on this is both fathers and mothers have an important role in dealing with kids and managing kids. And ideally, to be successful with kids, it's best to have both the father and the mother equally involved in the parenting.
Okay. Just give us a ballpark number of the clients that you see. How many come from two-parent homes?
Ballpark figure, there's been times, Mark, where I typically have 30 to 40 cases, and there are times where only a handful of those cases is the biological father in the home and actively involved. I would say my experience would be probably a third of the cases I have is the biological father actively involved.
Okay, so really 2/3 would be without a dad involved.
Correct.
Okay. How can parents provoke their children to anger? I mean, what does that look like? What do parents do that provoke their children to anger?
Well, to answer that, I'll go to what the kids tell me in counseling, what angers them from their parents. And three things kids tell me a lot. Kids don't like it when parents are inconsistent, if they give mixed messages. Allow them to do something one day, another day they say no. They allow a sibling to do something that they're not allowed to do. Now, granted, it's impossible to be totally fair as parents, and kids need to understand that. But kids get angry when there's inconsistencies, mixed messages from parents. Kids complain when parents freak out about small situations. I call it emotional parenting, emotional responses.
So define freak out. So kids get upset. Now, why are you guys laughing? Because I think you know what freak out means, right? Like why, but what does it look like when a parent freaks out, and what does that do to a child?
At least you didn't ask me to show what that looks like
Yeah,
when someone freaks out.
Because we've all been there.
I would say what kids would tell me is when parents overreact to what the kids would see would be a smaller mistake. A lot of times that means the parents yelling, parents giving out a harsher consequence than what is necessary. To me, is an emotional response. And again, as parents, we have to be quick on our feet at times with kids. Kids keep us off balance for sure. But parents do much better with what I call the strategic responses, the planned responses, to be prepared for what you're going to say to avoid freaking out. And then the other thing I want to refer to that kids get angry about is when they get consequence for something they did by mistake or they did by accident. And then that might go hand in hand with the parent freaking out. But it's important for us to remember that we consequence defiance. And not all noncompliance from kids is from defiance. For example, sometimes kids just forget what they were told to do, especially with younger kids. Parents can give them a list of directions. You go upstairs, put your pajamas on, brush your teeth, get in bed. You're lucky if the kid gets upstairs. After that point, all bets are off. Sometimes kids just aren't listening to instructions. They're in front of a screen, right? Don't always hear what the parent has to say. Boys struggle with listening. I'm not sure we ever get too much better with that. My wife tells me I have two major flaws. One is that I don't listen, and two, I don't know what she said. But I think it's important to remember that when we need to discipline our kids, it's out of defiance, and our kids aren't always defying us. Sometimes it's a mistake on their part.
Okay, so kids get angry when the punishment doesn't fit the crime, right? You freak out, and I'm going to take your cell phone away for a week and a half. And then 2 days later, okay, here, right? That's inconsistency.
Right. And then when that happens, often, then the consequences become a negotiation. The kids kind of expect that, well, the parent gave in last time. So it's important that we mean what we say, that we're good with follow-through as parents. If not, the kids will try to take advantage of it. It's what kids do.
Okay, it's what kids do. Did you hear that? Okay, so a follow-up to Ephesians 6:4 is almost the same parallel. Fathers, don't provoke your children to anger, so on and so forth. In Colossians, Paul says, fathers, do not aggravate your children. Listen to this. Or they will become discouraged. So how do parents discourage children?
I'm going to answer that with a story, if that's okay. A kid I had in counseling way back in the day, this would have been in the 90s. His name was Corey, probably about 13 years old. And Corey was constantly getting in trouble. And again, wasn't a bad kid. In fact, he was a likable kid, but the kind of kid who, as soon as I would discharge him from counseling, he'd do something to get himself back into counseling. I bumped into Corey years later at a Walmart, of all places. But he was married at that point in time, had a kid of his own, and we had a chance to talk. And I kind of joked. I said, Corey, I didn't think I'd ever be able to get you out of counseling. And his response was interesting. He said, you know what, Mr. Ted? I liked the counseling. The counseling really helped out my mom and dad. There were times where I was feeling really discouraged at home. I wasn't getting along with my parents weren't getting along with each other, it was high stress, and we would go to the counseling and it would help. He said, I remember driving to counseling in the car, we'd be arguing the whole way, and then on the way home from counseling, my parents would be in a better mood, they'd seem to be more willing to work on things, and of course he added, the only way I could get my parents to counseling was by getting in trouble, which was interesting as well. But I think we gain a couple insights from that. One, from what Corey said, he was discouraged when things were tough at home. And not only when he wasn't getting along well with his parents, but when the parents weren't getting along well with each other. That was discouraging, and that he didn't know quite what to do about that. You know, too. He saw positives to his negative behavior because that landed them in counseling. Having mom and dad sit down and talk about things really helped them in counseling to start, but then they were able to figure it out on their own and through their support systems. But I think that case is a great example for us.
Okay, terrific. One more scripture, Ephesians 6:1-3. This is now to children. Children, obey your parents because you belong to the Lord, for this is the right thing to do. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. If you honor your father and mother, things will go well with you and you will have a long life on earth. So, a couple questions. Why should children obey their parents?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, and I struggled with this. A lot of different possible answers to this. So I turned to a group who I really respect and I've learned a lot from, gained a lot of wisdom from over recent years for some help. My own kids. I asked my kids this question. And Olivia, my daughter, I thought had a great response, saying that if parents can teach kids discipline, teach kids to obey at a young age, that helps them out the rest of their life. That it helps them out in school. It helps them out in their job, getting along with the boss, in future relationships. And I thought this was a wonderful way to state it. As parents, we're trying to teach our kids these life lessons, that it's not simply about control or power, but it's trying to help them in the future.
So, what are the benefits of obeying your parents? You touched on some of it. When we were talking privately, you had this kind of pendulum swing between authoritarian and permissive. You gonna unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we all have different parenting styles. Moms and dads have different parenting styles, and we'll talk more about alignment. What we want to guard against is what I refer to as permissive parenting, which is allowing kids to do what they want, with the fallout to that being oftentimes kids will try to walk all over a parent who's too permissive. The flip side to that is what I call authoritarian, where the parent can be very controlling, micromanaging. The fallout to that would be kids might rebel against an authoritarian parent. And mom and dad have to be careful too, because it's easy to become the exact opposite of each other. If one is permissive, then the other becomes
How
much
often
more
do you see
strict.
that? I think this is really cool. How often do you see that one parent is way too permissive and one parent is way too strict?
I would say I see it a lot, because I think the mindset from parents could be it helps find that balance. Would be the thought behind it. But again, it creates issues for the kid, in my opinion. There is that strategy to the good cop, bad cop with parents, and sometimes we can utilize that. If one parent is always the bad cop, there's concerns with that. If one parent's always the good cop, there's concerns with that, in my opinion. The goal is to land in the middle, what I categorize as authoritative, and that parents can share roles. Share that good cop, bad cop role, too, is ideally what we try to do as parents.
Okay. Let me switch gears a little bit. What are some major challenges facing parents today? Major challenges, probably several, but what are 1, 2, 3 major challenges parents are facing?
I would say what parents tell me is, for instance, when they get into counseling and things aren't going well at home and they feel like their kids aren't listening to them, they express a sense of powerlessness. They feel stuck. And that powerlessness is not a good place to be for any of us, which is why the goal of counseling is to try to help empower parents to be able to try some new strategies, try some new techniques, hoping that they will have better results. I think this is fueled from parents trying things that they think should work with their kids, and it doesn't work, and that's discouraging for them. Or I think parents might raise their kids the way that they were raised. And we have a new generation of kid in some ways these days. I talk about routines a lot in counseling. I feel like for myself growing up, there was a lot of routines in place. I saw that with church, going to church all the time. And the kids didn't question mom and dad too much because it's what we did. We just went to church all the time. There was a routine with chores where we did chores consistently. And I feel like it's harder to get those routines in place. If anything, maybe kids have their own routines. Kids kind of follow their own schedule where they go to school, they might do some activities after school, they come home, do their homework, and then they're playing video games. They're on their phones the rest of the night. The kids have their own routines. So there's definite challenges for parents.
What would you say to a parent that brings their child into counseling and basically, without saying these words, but basically saying, fix them. We're powerless. We got nothing. What would you say?
Yeah, I refer to that as being child-focused. And it's understandable why parents feel that way, because what they are trying isn't working, and they're feeling exasperated. The concern with being child-focused, in my opinion, one, kids don't want to hear that they're the problem, right? It's not healthy for kids to be told they're the problem. If anything, parents can create their own monsters. Right?
Okay, what does that mean?
But I mean, you tell a kid he's got this problem, kid may live up to that expectation and become that problem. But secondly, being child-focused, the fix my kid mentality, probably doesn't help that feeling of powerlessness that parents have. With any relationship difficulty, if we're simply waiting or hoping for the other person to change, we could be waiting for a while. So there's value in our own decisions, our own behaviors, changing them, hoping that has a positive impact on the other person.
Okay. What would you say to a parent who's trying to address an issue with their child and all it does is turn into a big fight?
Yeah.
Everything turns into a big fight.
Yes.
No matter what it is, everything turns into a big fight.
Yes, and that's certainly a concern I hear, and parents will tell me, I'm not trying to fight. I'm just trying to get the kid to empty the dishwasher, and it turns into to a fight. So what we're talking about today, for instance, having difficult conversations, confronting a child, consequencing, disciplining a child. The goal is to do that in a positive, loving, godly way. Certainly that's the example that Christ set for us. Christ did a lot of instruction, did a lot of teaching. Christ certainly shows patience with us, with all the mistakes that we make. And that's certainly the model for us to follow. With the thought being, one, parents can set the tone. I would say the more positive parents are to their kids, there's a better chance they're going to get positives from their kid. Not all the time. Sometimes as parents, we say something, we say it so eloquently and beautifully, and the kid still doesn't listen to us. But over the long haul, the more positives we give our kids, the more positives we get back. And I also think it's important to note, sometimes for kids, the pushback they show, the noncompliance, the arguing, can be functional for them. It can be productive for them. A quick example, trash needs to go out. Parent goes up to the teenage son, could you take the trash out for me? The kid's playing Fortnite. He's busy. He either ignores what the parent says or says, I'm busy playing Fortnite. I'm with my friends. I can't take the trash out. Half hour goes by, hour goes by, trash still isn't out. Parent gets frustrated, right? Goes to the kid, confronts the kid again, and an argument breaks out. Sometimes, how does it play out after that? The parent says, all right, never mind, I'll take the trash out myself. Or the parent says something inappropriate in the heat of the argument, that emotional response. I'm sorry I called you the laziest kid in the history of the world. I'll take the trash out tonight. You take the trash out next week. Example of how the kid's pushback worked for him. He's still playing Fortnite. Someone else took the trash out. So it's important for parents to follow through with what we're asking the kid to do, and that might mean showing some patience, and recognize that the arguing probably won't work. In fact, it might work against us as parents.
Okay. How important is it to have a plan?
I would say it's very important to have a plan. Going back to my days working in juvenile residential, I mean, we would plan and predict for kids saying no when we asked them to do something. So I really had in the back of my mind, what's going to happen when this kid says no?
Wait a minute. Did you just hear that? So much of parenting is reacting. They do this, we do this. You're talking about having a plan. You're talking about playing a chess game. And playing a chess game means you anticipate their response. Is that what you're talking about and what you're going to do?
Yeah, and I'm not saying that our glass should always be half empty with our kids. But especially if we know the kid's playing Fortnite, he's not going to want to take out the trash. To have in the back of my mind, what happens if he says no to this or he ignores me? Great time to collaborate with your spouse or a support. I find there's value in outnumbering kids. When you have to have a difficult conversation, going at them 2-on-1, much better chance you're getting a positive response. When kids were little, we'd have them sit time out for 10 minutes when they were being naughty. Oftentimes that 10 minutes was helpful for us as parents as well, to kind of regroup, and kind of the same thing we're talking about, that you might give that initial directive and get ignored. Take that step back, take that parent time out, think about a plan, talk to your spouse. Also a great time just to pray about this. Ask for the Lord's help, because you're sensing this could be difficult. We don't want to fight with our kids, but that game planning can be really important for parents.
Okay. We're winding down toward the end. Just a couple questions. One is, talk to us about the importance of co-parenting and the need for something called alignment.
Yes, parental alignment is something that I teach in counseling. And again, we've talked about some of the reasons why that's helpful. And let's face it, kids nowadays, I guess kids when we were growing up, are savvy. Um, if a kid asks dad a question, dad says no, what's the kid do? Ask mom. And if mom and dad aren't on the same page, the kid's going to take advantage of that as well. So we have to be prepared for that. But again, these supports are really helpful for parents. Sometimes the question is, I want to ask my kid to do this. Is this an appropriate thing to ask them to do? Is this fair? Is this reasonable? Just to make sure what you're asking of the kid is an appropriate request. I tell kids in counseling all the time, you need to listen to mom and dad. It's my job to make sure that mom and dad have expectations and rules that are fair and reasonable. If they're fair, you need to listen to mom and dad. But it starts with mom and dad being on the same page, the parent being clear with their expectations and having fair expectations.
What would you say to parents that aren't on the same page? How do parents get on the same page? And then the follow-up is we need to make sure we talk before we close about single parents. How do single parents have alignment when you're not married, you're divorced, whatever? So go back to how do parents get on the same page?
Well,
You have another therapy session?
This is difficult because parents can have different strategies, different approaches, and that's okay. But figuring out a plan that works for the child and really putting the child's needs first as what would work for the kid might mean a different approach. But I think we see from kids like Corey that if mom and dad don't get on the same page, things may not get better, and kids may call attention to mom and dad not being on the same page. So that's where parents have to be able to have those difficult conversations with each other, like you referred to last week, hash some of this stuff out, and put that game plan together for the kid.
Talk about co-parenting in a single-parent home. What does that look like?
Well, supports are very important for families, especially for single parents, that they have extended family, friend, a teacher, someone from the school staff, pastor, youth pastor, a counselor that they can refer to for help. Single parents have their work cut out for them. One, it's a lot of work. Again, I see evidence that kids do better when they're confronted by two people. So kids might be more apt to show pushback to a single parent. So that support system within that ecology is important. That whether it's planning for a situation or for the parent to say, you know what, my kid's grades are really bad, I'm going to have to take away the PlayStation 4 for a week and have someone come over, can you help me enforce this? Because I'm afraid this isn't going to go well. And have that support come over, you might get a much better response from the child.
So putting this just on a plain old practical level, and I'll use a single parent, could be a single mom, single dad, but let's just use a single mom for a minute. She's got a 12-year-old son who doesn't listen to her no matter what she says. But she could reach out to, what I'm hearing you say is she could reach out to somebody in his constellation, somebody in his economy, use that word economy, somebody in his sphere that does have influence, draw them in and say, this is what's going on, can you help me? And essentially, they're becoming a surrogate parent in some sense. It could be a grandfather, it could be somebody else, but somebody's coming in to have that difficult conversation. Is that really what you're saying?
That's exactly right. And again, it's hearing what that single mom is saying in a different voice. And like you alluded to, the parent may get on the kid's case about grades, but the coach says something about the grades, the kid might react to that better. The principal addresses the grades with the kid might respond to that better. Those are supports that a parent can use to hopefully be more effective with the child.
Okay, thank you. Hey, last question. Just give us some nuggets. So this is kind of like just throwing it out there. Just give us some nuggets of wisdom. They don't even have to be related. Just some things that we haven't talked about that you thought, I probably ought to say this before we go.
I would just refer to the routines more because I feel like we've really lost the routines. Life is hectic nowadays. There's so much going on. And it can be a simple place to start if we're struggling at home to try to establish some routines. I talk with parents about the routine of eating dinner together. And with some of the families I work with, the goal is to have dinner together 2 times a week. Maybe that's the best you can do, but that's a starting point. That chore routine to try to get the kids more consistent in helping out around the house. And some of the things we've talked about through praise, through positives, it's all about building that routine. I always give the illustration of the 5-year-old kid who's learning how to brush his teeth, and the parent gives him a nickel every time he brushes his teeth. The goal isn't to give him a nickel every time he brushes his teeth until he's 19 and moves out. It's more so to get him in the routine of brushing his teeth, and then you can stop paying him, and he's going to keep brushing his teeth. So simple steps like that we can take. Trying to eat some meals together. Again, I reference being in church all the time growing up, which not only provided great memories for me, but it kept me out of trouble because I was in church all the time. To consistently try to get here to church, to try to have devotions for your kids, or just to pray for your kids. Going back to the theory that we control what we can, and maybe it's hard to get the family all together for devotions throughout the week, but we're going to pray for our kids every day. Try to have some type of routine around the screens. I know kids don't want to hear me say that with the video game systems, the phones, but try to have some limits on that. Allows time for some other routines around the house.
Should parents know all their kids' passwords?
I'm looking at the kids.
No, I mean, that's a big question, right? Because some of you parents are thinking, I don't know, it's their privacy, I don't want to hurt their self-esteem. Just what do you think?
Well,
I mean, you're not the gospel, right? You're just giving your opinion.
Yeah, and what I teach, there can be some value in allowing kids to have phones at a young age. See, I did say something positive for the kids. Because if you give your child a phone or an iPad at a young age, you're more attuned to say, hey, but I want your username, I want your password at that point in time. And then you have it. And there is some value in that on social media so that you not only can see what's on their story, but you can get into their messages as well. I think there's value in starting that early. And then your kid, in my opinion, can earn his way out of that.
Ooh, talk to us about that, okay? Your kid can earn your way into something or out of something.
For instance, on the screens, if the kid shows he can be trusted, and not just by staying out of trouble on the phone, but following the boundaries that perhaps the parent says, hey, I want everything turned off at 9 o'clock. I want phones turned in at 10 o'clock. Kids cooperate with that. That could be one of the positives they get of perhaps having some more independence if they earn that.
Sure. Okay. Anything else?
I think that's it.
Okay. Would you like to express your appreciation to Ted? Thank you. Would you stand, please? If you're near your spouse or if you're near your kids, why don't you just grab their hand? I want to pray a prayer of blessing. If you're near your grandparents, grab their hand. We're going to say a prayer of blessing, okay? Our Father, your goal in our lives ultimately is to experience the kind of joy in the family you enjoy in the Trinity. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The joy, the peace, the love that is there in your family, you want us to experience in our nuclear family. Help us to get there. May this time that we've had take us further down the journey of what it means to be Christ-like and all in with you. Help parents in this room that are stuck, paralyzed, not feeling empowered. Help kids that are feeling stuck, paralyzed, not feeling empowered. May something that was said in these last 35 minutes or so unstuck us. Maybe it's as simple as saying, you know what? I got to work on me before I can expect anybody else to do their part. Lord, I pray a blessing over every family that's in this room, every single mom who is doing her absolute best, every single dad who's trying to be mom and dad, every husband and wife that say to themselves, we had no idea it would be this hard. I mean, we're smart people. Can't we figure this out? And yet they find themselves in a place of scratching their head saying, I don't know what to do. Help them to gain your mind today. For every grandparent that prays diligently for their grandson or granddaughter, for every uncle and aunt, for every niece and nephew, for every coach, every teacher, every person who is connected to a child, a teen, a young adult. I'd pray that they would take away something today and go, you know what? I can do at least this to be Jesus to them. In fact, Lord, as we leave, I'm asking that you would help us to be you wherever we go this week. Home, work, neighborhood. A whole bunch of people are going to get on a flight and fly someplace else for work, someplace else in the country or internationally. I pray that they would be your ambassadors. And I pray this for your glory, Jesus. Amen. Hey, God bless you all. Have a great day. Congratulations once again, graduates.